Are you currently feeling like the ground underneath your feet is starting to crumble, like there's repetitive, fearful thoughts that keep popping up, like incidents outside of your control keep popping up to trigger these incessant thoughts, these incessant fears, and it's seemingly on this never-ending spiral of dread and panic? Well, if you think you're on the spiritual path, this could be a very big sign that you're currently experiencing the very beginning phases of what's known as ego death. And it's in this phase of ego destabilization is a pivotal mark in your transition on this awakening journey. And so if that sounds familiar to you or any of that resonates, then this video might be exactly what you're looking for to demystify the awakening journey and the ego death process for you. Watch this video until the end and you'll have clarity and understanding of what you may be going through right now and how to start alleviating the panic, anxiety, fear and dread that you may be experiencing on a constant loop. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. My name's Todd, where I provide channelings and insights to help you demystify your awakening journey so you can be guided along this path. In this video, I want to provide clarity and insights on what ego death actually is and what you're actually experiencing now can be transformed into a way to help you more smoothly and more seamlessly guide you along this very, very turbulent at times path. So what is ego death in actuality? And what does it look like for you? So I've created this slideshow so we could more easily go through step by step so we can create a better understanding on what ego death actually looks like. So ego death is a profound spiritual experience, often misunderstood. And what it really is it marks the transitional period between the illusion of the individuated character and you identifying as that into who you really are, is the soul, and the soul which permeates all of your physical experience. And so it can actually almost be compared to a switching of operating systems. So imagine you're a supercomputer for a moment and you've been running on an outdated operating system for all this time. Because of this reality in the 3D is so dense, the operating systems that humanity has been running on for a long time are now outdated, and essentially what's happening is across the whole globe, those who want to are being upgraded into the operating system of their soul. But this means we have to eliminate the distorted operating system that we've been operating under for so long. So let's get into it. So what's the nature of the ego operating system? And it's based on illusion and separation. It's an outdated operating system running programs based on misconceptions. And the main misconception is that you are the individual character itself, based in subject-object reality, in separation, and in illusion. This is what I believe anyway is classified as the original sin, the identification with illusion and separation, and the temporary forgetting of who we really are, which is the consciousness and the awareness that permeates the entirety of this reality. Because of the original sin, if you want to call it that, the original misconception or the original distortion, then from that arises all of these other distortions, such as negative beliefs, limiting beliefs, dense emotions, dense energies, and destructive behaviors. So it can almost be seen like within this operating system of the ego that is outdated and distorted, let's call it the distorted ego operating system. Within this operating system has arisen a bunch of different programs that are based in similar distortion. So we've created through misperception, limiting beliefs like unworthiness, limiting beliefs like scarcity, limiting beliefs like separation. And so because of these misaligned and distorted perceptions, aka they are not base truth in base reality, these distorted energies and frequencies can be found around our energy field, and they comprise the structure or the framework of the perpetuation of the distorted ego operating system. So what the ego death process actually is it's synonymous with the awakening process. So what's actually happening is this supercomputer that our souls are experiencing through, or these prisms of light that our souls are experiencing through, aka the physical avatar. The awakening process is a realignment of us thinking from a distorted perception of being based in the ego operating system, and we're realigning with the truth of who we really are in the soul. So the awakening process is usually triggered, or it can be triggered. It doesn't have to look exactly like this, but it can be triggered by some sort of soul recognition where our soul recognizes a powerful frequency in another. So this is actually very, very similar to what's experienced in the twin flame journey, is that the soul recognizes itself in another individuated character, and therefore that triggers a destabilization in the distorted ego. So the twin flame journey is actually a very, very powerful process of awakening, and that's its main purpose, is to destabilize the outdated and distorted ego operating system and all of its dense frequencies, so the process of displacement can begin. And what I mean by displacement is that the dense, distorted frequencies, these negative programs that have been created through the perspective of the ego operating system, must be balanced out, transmuted, and displaced so that our physical character, our physical avatar experience can be infused with more and more soul frequency of who we truly are. So we're coming into more and more alignment and more fullness of who our core frequency and who we really are. So we can experience physical reality through the perspective of the soul instead of the outdated and distorted ego operating system. So it's a total realignment and upgrading in operating system. Other causes or other triggers of spiritual awakening can be suffering. So suffering, why a lot of Zen masters talk about suffering being a form of grace, is because suffering can be seen as the sandpaper of the soul. So the sandpaper that starts to chisel away at all of the programs of the outdated, distorted ego operating system until such time where only the soul is revealed as being the fundamental truth, and the ego operating system gives way for the soul operating system. So that's another potential trigger for a spiritual awakening process, is suffering. And another trigger for a spiritual awakening process could be guru. So people following different gurus, but this is more in alignment with soul recognition, because these gurus are vibrating at such a high frequency. The soul recognition is there, and it also triggers displacement because they're vibrating at such a high frequency and they're embodying more of who they really are. Then at the level of unity consciousness, their frequency is able to trigger your own alchemical process of deconstructing the distorted ego. And then so during the awakening process, what you're going to find is your vibration and frequency increases as these distorted energy packets, these distorted programs that sit around your energy field become balanced and transmuted out into your soul frequency. So raising your frequency and the spiritual awakening process is much, much more a process of letting go of all the denseness and distortions and mistruths of who you really are not. And so within that space that was previously distorted, now makes more room for your soul frequency to inhabit your physical experience. So the ego death experience can look something like the following. So there are stories, of course, of people who have an instantaneous collapse. So essentially what that is something triggers an instantaneous seeing through all veils of who they are not in such a way where the outdated and distorted ego operating system instantly collapses in on itself. It was seen that they never were the ego identity, and it's seen instantly and profoundly of who they truly are at the soul level. And because it's such a profound and instantaneous insight, the belief in being the ego identity never reforms. It doesn't have any more power to reform. However, what's more common is that it's a gradual process from identifying with the ego operating system to the soul operating system, to such a point where the ego operating system no longer has any more momentum to re-establish itself. And so what's happening here during gradual oscillation between the ego operating system and the soul operating system is the ego has enough momentum, and the belief in being the ego has created enough momentum that it's able to keep coming back online, even though there's periods of time where you may feel like you're deeply in soul, in unity consciousness, and you can't imagine even thinking that you're the character anymore. There's still enough momentum behind that belief of you being the character. A trigger could happen, and then instantly you're realigning and believing that you're the character. And so an important distinction at this particular point is to recognize that there is nothing else but the soul. You are already the soul. Even right now, if you're steeped in suffering, you are already the soul. It's just that there's so much momentum behind the belief in being the ego and the ego operating system that it's perpetuating this idea that you're the character. And so what are some common characteristics of what you might be feeling right now or have felt in the past during an ego death? And essentially the primary focus and primary operation of the ego is it thinks it's perpetuating the character's survival. This is essentially why it's called ego death, because this operating system actually thinks that the character is being annihilated, which on one hand is actually correct, because the very idea of you being a character or a character even existing is actually illusion and false to begin with. Of course, a character appears, and the character will continue to appear when you realign back to soul, but the identification and the identity you once thought you were will no longer be there. And so all the pain and all the suffering that's being caused by the distorted ego is actually an attempt in perpetuating and increasing the probability of the character's survival. And so as the ego operating system continues to run and continues to feel like it's being dissolved and threatened in any way, it's going to keep throwing up its defense mechanisms. And what's important to do during those periods is to try as best as possible to realign back to soul and become the observer during those times. Because becoming the observer of those dense frequencies and of those distortions when they're being activated, it removes the identification with those stories. It removes the story altogether. And that's what allows transmutation to occur, because you're the soul perspective, seeing and observing that energy from an objective point of view, and without the realignment and reactivation and buying into of that, that's what gives it a chance to transmute, dissolve, and clear and release back into soul energy. This process can be very, very uncertain. And oftentimes what will happen is the physical world will form and shape to create situations that actually trigger those really, really dense, really, really deep down triggers that need to come up and be brought to the surface so they can be transmuted and balanced out. And so at a certain point, you need to understand that you as the one who's experiencing this process are not in control, and you have to surrender into the process that your higher self has set up for you. So your higher self is the one that's guiding this process right now. And even though you could be going through a lot of pain and suffering right now, this is all being orchestrated by your higher self for a very, very distinct and real purpose. And that purpose is to create the realignment back to your soul, back to unity consciousness. And unity consciousness, of course, is the perspective of everything being one mind. So everything is the one mind of God, and we are experiencing an infinite number of perspectives all simultaneously. And in our individuated experience right now that we're experiencing is one perspective of the one mind of God. So the perspective that's viewing through this character right here that you're watching on camera in this video is a different perspective from the one that you're having. However, it is all a fractal of the one mind. And so this is explained by the Hermetic principle of mentalism, where everything is one mind, the universe is mental in nature, and essentially everything that's physical is actually contained within the one mind. So within the perspective that you're having, your body and the physical character that you think you are is actually sitting right now within your soul. So within your own fractal or your own perspective of the one mind of who you really are, sits your individual character, and your soul is permeating and focusing through that character so it can have a physical experience. And so this is what's meant by unity consciousness and the very purpose of a spiritual awakening. It's simply the upgrading of an operating system from the distortion of who we're not to who we really are, the soul. So what are some things that you can expect to experience as this ego death starts to get balanced out, transmuted, you're doing the inner work, and you're coming into more and more whole recognition and whole embodiment of who you really are, the soul? Obviously, expanded awareness. So more information becomes available to you. You feel more like you're an energy field as opposed to being a condensed and trapped within a physical body. Because you're expanded in your awareness and your vibrational frequency has increased, you actually become more receptive and a more cleaner conduit to higher information from your higher self. So you actually start to be able to receive downloads and channels from your higher self. And you can use this information to empower yourself and also empower others. You'll also experience an increase in the frequency of who you really are, which actually is unconditional love and compassion if you want to verbalize it in the form of language. But all you're really experiencing more of who you really are, more of your core soul frequency. And another benefit, of course, is authentic living. So what you might experience during this awakening process is a lot of your life changes. Maybe your job changes, your career changes, friends change, relationships change, living situations could change. All of that could change, some of it or none of it, depending on how aligned you are already. And what that means is that you'll actually be able to embody the expression of your soul and what you came in to experience in this life. And so I guess now comes to the point where if you are experiencing or you've just started to experience the ego death process and the destabilization of the ego operating system, the question becomes, how can we balance out these distorted programs and frequencies easier in a more seamless way so that we can then wind down the momentum of the belief in being the ego operating system? And this is where spiritual practice comes into play. Really, spiritual practice is just more about an alchemical, metaphysical process of transmuting energy more than anything. So this is where we can do meditations, journaling, and in particular energy work, things like Reiki, universal energy healing. One thing I resonated with a lot is the practice of doing clearings. So this is finding the core root of a distortion, so the root of a program that's held within the distorted ego, and doing a clearing on that. So there's many different tools and techniques to be able to do that. What I'll do is at the end of this video, I'll link a video to one particular technique that I like using in many situations, called the golden thread technique. So I'll link that in the video at the end here, and that's a guided practice that you can actually get started on balancing out those frequencies and distortions right now. And typically what happens, how this journey goes, is whatever practices and tools that you resonate with the most are the ones you'll be guided to, and you'll feel that resonance, and that they're the ones I'll encourage you to pick up and look at, because they're going to be the ones that have the greatest impact. And certainly I found that for me, as soon as I was ready for a new tool or technique, or I was ready to meet someone, or I was ready to meet a coach or go and see a healer, as soon as I was ready for that, my higher self would bring that into my awareness. And if that was definitely something that was for me, then I would follow that instinct immediately, and I would see that that did indeed form a crucial piece of the puzzle in unraveling the momentum of my distorted ego. And so maybe you've already experienced this when you've come across starting to use these tools and techniques, that some of the ones you resonate with the most are just the ones that work the best for you. I encourage you to do that, and that's something you can expect along this journey. And so throughout this video, I hope it provided a little bit of clarity, what you may be going through if you're feeling tense anxiety, irrational fears that keep looping and looping and looping, dense energies, crazy things that could be happening in your 3D physical experience. You could very well be experiencing the beginning signs of your own spiritual journey, your own ego death process, and it's beginning to destabilize, which is why you're experiencing all of this. So I'll encourage you to look into the tools and techniques. And here's a video up here where I guide you through the golden thread technique, which is one of my favorite tools to start transmuting and balancing out those distorted frequencies and unraveling the operating system based in distortion and ego. And if you found any of this information valuable, hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more insights and channelings that I provide. Thanks for watching.